I think it's a little bit of both. I do think the president wants to wind down the war. All wars are wars of miscalculation, and this war has been riddled with miscalculations. Everything from the Iranian resolve to continue to fight and kind of regime collapse despite the decapitation, to Iran's willingness to hit energy supplies and close the Straits of Hormuz. And so I think the president has been quite surprised by Iran's military resilience and is looking for a way to kind of wind down. But it's also not in his nature, Jumana, to back down, to look publicly as if he's backing down. So on the one hand, he says there are talks with Iran, while on the other hand, he continues to engage in a military buildup of Marines coming to the Persian Gulf region.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, let's just pursue the train of thought that they are looking for a diplomatic solution here, and that those indirect discussions will yield something. Who is effectively the person that the U.S. are dealing with on the other side in Iran right now? Because there have been many suggestions to the effect that because some of this senior echelon of Iranian leadership have been taken out, if anything, they've been replaced with even more hardline individuals who would be less incentivized to get a deal across with the U.S.
That's absolutely right. There are certainly the commanders of the Revolutionary Guards in Iran are a generation that cut their teeth in the wars in Iraq and Syria and kind of have that mindset in mind, rather than the older generation of generals from the Iran-Iraq war who were much more pragmatic comparatively. So you're absolutely right. But the Iranians were negotiating with the foreign minister of Iran, taking the lead in the negotiations, and I think that would continue. I think it's also important to remember that although the Iranians have been preparing themselves for a war like this, Iran is getting a pounding, and at some point, the population will turn around and demand that the leadership kind of talk to Trump. So on the one hand, you have this revolutionary rhetoric that Iran wants to continue the war and wants to maintain its resistance to American and Israeli aggression, while on the other hand, there's also a palpable, real desire to bring the war to some sort of meaningful conclusion.
Yeah, one thing that I thought is interesting is the increasingly frustrated and angry rhetoric that you're getting out of many of these Gulf states. And it's understandable, of course, because their infrastructure has been really damaged and targeted by Iran. How is this going to change the nature of the relationship looking ahead between Gulf states and Iran? Is there still a possibility for Gulf states to have diplomatic relations with the Islamic Republic and the regime, assuming that the leadership stays intact once this war is over? Let's say it happens in the next 5 days.
Jumana, you're asking a question that all of us are asking, and I wish I really had a concrete answer. Moving forward, I think that becomes the central question of the international relations of the region. But I think we need to remember that Iran isn't going anywhere. So regardless of the leadership that's there, the states of the Gulf Cooperation Council would realize, and they do realize, that they need to deal with Iran. And history has shown that the Iranian leadership responds positively to positive engagement and conditional engagement rather than to marginalization and putting pressure on it. So my sense is that once the dust is settled, maybe it will take months or maybe even a couple of years at this point. But once the dust settles, we will have once again diplomatic rapprochement between Tehran and Riyadh Tehran and Abu Dhabi, and even Tehran and Manama.
Maybe early days to be thinking about that for the time being. It's something to think about once the war is over. Mehran Kamrava, thank you so much for joining us, a government professor at Georgetown University in Qatar. What we've been talking the energy ramifications of the war in Iran. And we've just got some comments coming through from the Croatia central bank governor. And he's saying, Vucic is saying, ECB must be vigilant, facing stagflation risk. Officials will know soon whether they must act. Risk is moving in the direction of stagflation. This is something that we were talking about with our prior markets guest, and that the market has moved on from the say a quick war shock to actually the real possibility of stagflation and the impact that could have on economies, specifically Europe, which is very exposed to the energy channel coming through from many of these Middle East suppliers, especially on the gas side of things. And so here you have one ECB member in an interview talking about the stagflation risks facing the Eurozone, and officials will have to know soon whether they must act. And probably means they're hike into some of the inflationary shocks to come. Here's a picture of euro, though. We've got the euro trading a little bit softer this morning, down 0.7%. European markets are seen opening down in the red, at 0.8%. Now, sticking to energy, Chevron CEO Mike Wirth has warned that even if the crisis in the Middle East eases, the physical damage to infrastructure and the depletion of specific crude grades present a long-term challenge to stability.
What's different from 2022 and the Ukraine situation is we never really saw a supply constraint. We've got a lot of oil and gas now that is not flowing into the market. And so there really is a difference in terms of physical supply this time versus what we've seen in prior incidents. Physical supply chains don't respond immediately. And so even if the strait opens at some point, it will take time to rebuild inventories of the right grades of crude, the right types of products around the world to meet demand. And then, of course, the other thing that is increasingly a concern is with production being shut in a number of fields and facilities, some of those facilities having suffered damage, in some cases reportedly pretty significant damage, how quickly that production can actually come back online.
That was Chevron CEO Mike Wirth. Now, coming up, fertilizer supplies into Africa are tightening as the Iran war disrupts trade. We'll bring you the details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Joanna Versace in Dubai. Fertilizer supplies into Africa are coming under pressure as the Iran war disrupts global chains. Countries like Nigeria, which rely heavily on imports from China and Russia, are already facing delays with prices rising and availability tightening. Our chief Africa correspondent Jennifer Sabazasha joins us from Johannesburg. Well, it's interesting, Jen, because this isn't just about fertilizer disruption, but also the knock-on effects that can have to food as well. So how exposed many of these African nations?
That's right, Jumana. It's really across the supply chain. And if you take a look at some of the countries that are really highly exposed, you can look across the world, not just on the continent. So there's Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And a lot of it is because, as you say, many of these countries are heavily reliant on imported fertilizer. We should note that we talk quite a bit about the Strait of Hormuz being critical for oil supply. It also accounts for about 1/3 of the world's fertilizer supply and raw materials that passes through the strait. So it's quite critical if we do see disruptions continue. And it's also the timeline factor of this, right? Many farmers across the world are preparing for their planting season, depending on where you are. Of course, in America, it's a different planting season than across the continent, what they are looking at. And so the concern is that this will not just hit the imported cost for a number of farmers, but this could continue to trickle down into what will eventually and potentially even end up being a higher cost for the consumer if in fact we do continue to see inflated costs on things like wheat and corn and elsewhere. So what we've heard from the continent at this point in time, Kenya's had some discussions about alternative sources of funding for alternative sources of fertilizer, excuse me. Farmers in South Africa critically are very reliant on commercial farming, unlike the rest of the continent. Fertilizer is very key for the planting season. And so we could continue to see more farmers, soybean farmers, sunflower farmers, struggling, from the effects not just of a potential crunch from fertilizer, but also from diesel.
Earn an online MBA recognized for real salary growth. Clinical repair.
Express. You can take on Miami, Mexico City, or many others.
Well, we should know in your intro you pointed out China and Russia. So what we saw prior to the war starting is we did actually see prices for sulfur that were reaching a high. And so we had already seen some countries across the world, the major producers, we're talking China, Russia, and India, prioritizing some of their own domestic demand. And so potentially some of these producers who are able to produce domestically and export are going to be the ones that actually end up potentially doing a bit better than some of the other ones. But if we look on the continent in particular, Morocco is quite significant for its own contribution to the fertilizer supply chain. The OCP, which is a state-owned company, makes the world's biggest phosphate rock. That is key. Also, Dangote's fertilizer company has again been receiving quite a lot of orders as we continue to see more shock across the supply chain. But still, as we await the planting season to actually kick off, we might have to wait a little bit longer to see who in fact are the winners in this whole scenario.
Jen, thank you so much. Jennifer Zabazaja, our Chief Africa Correspondent in Johannesburg. Now for a look at some of the other stories we're following. Nigeria is speeding up crude approval processes to help meet surging demand. The country's regulators said permits for crude vessels and cargo evacuations will now be processed within hours to speed up production. Officials say the move is aimed at helping Africa's largest oil producer reach its target of 1.84 million barrels a day and to contribute to overall market stability. Namibia has rejected Starlink's application to operate in the country, denying the satellite internet provider both a telecommunications service license and access to radio spectrum. The move effectively blocks Elon Musk's satellite internet service from launching nationwide coverage. Starlink now has up to 90 days to seek reconsideration of the decision under local law. And coming up, Bloomberg Markets Live joins us next as the rally in stocks eases amid renewed caution over the war in Iran. This is Bloomberg. To markets now. Brent crude remains elevated while gold extends its slump as fragile optimism around a potential de-escalation in Middle East tensions gives way to renewed caution. For more, Bloomberg's executive editor, Mark Cudmore, joins us from Singapore. Mark, this morning, I think it's interesting to note that the setup going into Europe for European futures, for Wall Street futures is pretty negative, but the hangover from Asia this morning has been quite robust. Asian markets, once again, and we spoke about this yesterday, perhaps being too complacent about the real possibility of this war ending.
I think so. I think that generally there's global complacency out there. Now, we need to put this in perspective. As we've talked about a lot, it's the worst month for global stocks in 2.5 years, and Asian stocks are going to get particularly bad. So the last 3 weeks have already seen decent losses. I think, unfortunately, there's still much more to come. No one's been able to articulate a coherent off-ramp to Iran right now. I am very worried by the market putting too much dependency on what Donald Trump says, even though he keeps on changing his mind all the time, because he is not the only protagonist, and he's not arguably the key decision maker right now. Iran is in control of the Strait. Iran decided when the Strait opened. Now, potentially the US can change that, but ultimately, Trump saying he wants to end the war isn't the key thing. What Iran wants to do. And as a result of that, I'm not a geopolitical expert, but because no one's been able to give me a good off-ramp for Iran, I must assume that, it's going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And I think that there is still excess complacency in markets, despite the fact that it's been such a bad month for global stocks. I think we have a lot worse over the next week.
And so much volatility as well, as we were talking about yesterday. Really interesting chart come through from our colleague David Inglis, who's saying that EM carry trades have been terrible, have performed terribly over the course of the last month, throughout the course of this war. Because of this underlying volatility, it must make it very hard for investors to even contemplate putting on some of those carry trades.
Absolutely. So when you're looking at a carry trade, you're basically looking at return to volatility. That's the basic ratio you're kind of considering. So, even if the returns still look good, if the denominator is going higher, it just looks much less attractive on a risk reward basis. It's the same logic that's going into the fact of why people need to just deleverage, because as we see more realized volatility, that feeds into higher value at risk measures, which means the same position you had last week shows up on your risk ratio as being much larger on a dollar-adjusted basis this week, which means you slowly are getting under pressure to decrease positions. And I think that's the backdrop dynamic that we've gone here. The longer the volatility stays high, the more that kind of value at risk, the dollar measure starts to put further pressure on the market. And that's why I think that the backdrop is still remain very negative for at least another couple of weeks for global stocks, for global risk assets. It might seem as been quite bad so far, but of course there's probably more pain to come.
Mark, thank you so much. We'll leave it on that positive note. Mark Cudmore, Bloomberg's executive editor for Markets Live, and heading into the European session, as I just mentioned, and picking up on what Mark was just saying, there is some negativity in some of these major indices. European markets are still opening down in the red, similar for Wall Street. That is it for Horizons Middle East and Africa. I'm Joanna Versace in Dubai. Stay with us for Daybreak Europe. This is Bloomberg.
Newsmakers and market movers. This is The Pulse with Francine Lacqua.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to The Pulse. I'm Francine Lacqua here in London. Now, Iran's parliamentary speaker has denied any negotiations with the U.S. are taking place, dismissing the reports as fake news. It comes after Trump told reporters that the U.S. would delay strikes against Iran's energy infrastructure after what he called productive conversations with the country.
I think there's a very good chance we're going to end up in a deal. And so we're giving it 5 days, and then we're going to see where that takes us. And I would say at the end of this period, I think it could very well end up being a very good deal for everybody. As good as if we went all the way and just literally annihilated the plant, which if we don't have to do that, that would be a good thing
With us now is Paul Wallace, Bloomberg's managing editor for Middle East, of course, and Africa economy and government. And then in the second we're speaking to Christian Gleesman from Goldman Sachs. So first of all, Paul, what do we actually know happened? So Trump yesterday was claiming that there was some kind of resolution, a possible ceasefire, with the Iranians said, no, there aren't.
Yeah, exactly. And it is confusing all around. It seems as if talks have started at some level, probably indirect talks between the Iranians and the US. We're not exactly sure who the mediator is at this stage. The likes of Turkey and Pakistan are certainly involved at some level. But clearly what the remarks yesterday from Trump, I think, were the first time we've heard of him really, and seriously talking about de-escalation. Obviously, we've had the Iranian denial. Some of that is semantics because they don't want to say they're having direct talks with the US at the moment. I think also Trump has probably got ahead of himself. As we heard in that clip, he's talking about 5 days to reach a deal. That's probably quite optimistic because the gap between the two sides remains wide. Of course, it is possible that they reach one, but it could well take longer, and there's no guarantee that they'll manage to get there.
So, Paul, first, oil has resumed its advanced business worried about what's happening in the Middle East, but also the Iranian sides, have they changed in nature because they seem to be persistent?
That's another point. No, they haven't changed, and yes, they have persisted. So it was a bad night last night for Kuwait. It had a lot of strikes on its territory. Bahrain was the same. There was an Amazon data center that seems to have been hit, or at least minor damage in Bahrain overnight. Israel was hit this morning with a ballistic missile in Tel Aviv and some other areas. So the war continues at the moment. To be fair to Trump, he never said hostilities would end immediately or anything like that. Sitting all the strikes on Iran power plants, but the war at the moment continues as normal.
Okay, well, thanks so much. And the other question is that, if the Gulf states get more involved, what that looks like for the Northern team still be trying to figure out exactly what happens next. Paul Roberts, you're in charge of our Middle Eastern coverage. Now, the incoming vice president of the ECB, Boris Richards, says the bank must be very agile and vigilant to keep prices in check as the Iran war raises the risk of stagflation. Officials expecting to know soon if the fallout from the conflict will require higher interest rates. We're doing this now as Christian Gleesman, head of asset allocation research at Goldman Sachs. Christian, thank you so much for being with us. I mean, when you look again, we were just talking with Paul, it's quite difficult to know where the conflict goes next. So what does it mean for how you build your portfolio right now? Is it risk off or are you in a wait and see situation?
Well, you're still in this high velocity phase of the conflict. And as a result of that, there is a case for being a bit more defensive. So we've been defensive. We've shifted defensive pretty much a week after the conflict started. And I think the challenge you have is a stagflationary shock.
However, on the $150,000 accounts, it does take a little bit longer, but the payouts amount bigger. So, or just on the trade advice payout goal, $50,000 accounts can take out $1,500 per account maximum. Okay, and then depending on how much accounts you have. So let's just say you have 5 accounts, which is their max allocation. 5 accounts, it becomes $7,500 payout versus $150,000 account, which may take 2 to 3 months to actually reach the payout, but it's $15,000. But as I explained at the previous slide, that on a $50,000 account, you can get there in 2 weeks and trading days. So if you're calculating by month, I'm making $15,000 in 1 month versus trading a $150,000 account in 2 to 3 months, because the profit target is $9,000 per account, right? So that's why it just takes a little bit longer, and you will have to flag a little bit bigger on the $150,000 accounts. So it's a matter of what makes you feel comfortable. Are you okay with spending more your money, your hard-earned money into valuation accounts and actually put in the investment, or do you want to go the longevity route where you're getting an account and you want to keep that money 6 months, 1 year, or it takes you, right? How much do you want? How much do you want it, right? That's really what it comes down to. So these are the 2 strategies that I tested, and it worked.
Good. Awesome, man. Okay, so questions in chat. Go ahead. I know this is a lot of information. I just want to take a minute. And this is a big slide here because it's like good decision point for people to like PK or one for. I think we'll set that on screen just for the moment. You guys can review it. And you know, if you have any questions, type it in the chat in like 30 seconds because I know we have a delay. But like, when I was going through and trying to figure out what I was going to do, I did 150Ks with Tradify. This was last year at the point. You know, I think I gave it like 3 or 4 shots. So just didn't pass. You know, I passed the eval. I think I passed all of the evals. It was getting dead pain, you know. And I just didn't have the patience. I was like, I'm not making money with this. I have 100,000 in cash. I kept going. And I was like, it's over it. I know it's kind of BS, to be honest with you. And then the 50Ks, I just this last go around, I just made it a point to size light. I said it when I started. People were there. Like, don't treat this right. We'll see what happens. Right. And okay, so
For you, Mike, the speed route is more it fit your personality a little bit better.
thank you, Troy. Yeah, exactly.
It's really just a personality thing. You know, pick one and go for it.
I just wanted to get a payout to me. You know, like how can I be preaching about how trading? Even if I feel like, dude, you're not a real coach, and let's go, you know, but it's just I would really trade it. It's like I'm not even getting used to futures is so much different than switches, right? But yeah, because you know, yeah, but we got a question, a couple of things in here. Let's see. Dollar risk. You know, contract risk. A little confused when Jimmy said 3 micros max for the 50K accounts. Okay, so I'll bring that back up here. So what is exactly like be real specific with the question so we get into that. You said you're a little confused when he says 3 micros max for 50K account. What exactly are you confused about? Because that was a setup. That was his, and that's the highest he says that you should risk, right? For a 50K account. So does that make sense? So that would be like your A setup. Don't go beyond 3 because if you lose it, depending on obviously the draw income to me, right? The draw, like what you're going to lose on the account. Is there basically instead of thinking of it in contracts, to me, is there a number that you that would that be better instead of saying, hey, I'll go past 3 micros? What if it, because you see what I'm saying? You can what if your range for your stop loss is really deep? You know what I mean? That's just where the stop loss needs to be. And so is it a percentage thing or is it
It really depends on the market volatility. Like, so for example, I use it with the long tool, let's say long and short tool on TradingView. And if you double click it into the setting, and let's show them an example, or if you do a long tool there, and if you double click it, you can put your account size, you can put your risk. Okay. Let's say you have 50K worth 250, let's say $200.
okay?
$200. Okay. And then if we press OK, now it'll tell us the actual quantity there, 1.67. 1.667, right? So it's right now it's 0.7. So we should only be trading 1 micro depending on where your stop loss goes. But sometimes when the market is not as volatile, it's gonna show like 2 contracts or even 3 contracts. It's just that we are in a very volatile market right now, which is 139 points to the upside. There's 40 points, like 100 points and 200 points, literally going back and forth. Which is why 1 micro only makes sense right now. But and when there's those days where we have a 40 point or 50 point board range, and we're targeting the bottom ones based off of that, then we can possibly go 3 micros. That's what it kind of comes down to as dollar risk twice.
I think it's basically you look at the dollars, Donald, instead of like he's just saying 3 micros is kind of a lot. Like you're probably not going to be able to go past 3, just in general, especially when you this is fantastic. Thank you guys for sharing. Dude, that's awesome. Thank you for checking it out. This is all just for you guys. It's value for you guys. We're not putting this in a course, you know, we're getting it out there. So would it be better just to focus on Mateo says, would it be better to focus on one account at first, get a payout before copy trading multiple accounts? That's a good question.
Yeah, so I have different opinions on that. So it kind of depends on where you are in your journey of your trading, right? If you are brand new and you're not profitable, you're not confident enough to keep continue getting to the payout, then I would say start with 1. don't over risk and try to go for the actual shiny offense because only 0.75% of all initial challenge buyers successfully reach their first payout. So statistically wise, I should have done the same thing when I first started, but I was always maxing out 20 accounts of Apex, blow it, especially when I first started proper. So yes, that is the correct way to do it, but it just all depends on where you are on your journey. But for me, if you were to tell me, hey, to go only trade one account, I would rather trade a live account if I'm going to do that. The proper only makes sense because I can scale those full accounts. But that's also because I can I treat this as a business and I can also invest the money into the products because I know I will get there to the payouts.
Nice. That makes sense. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Last question oriented for now, but I love the movie mindset. Are you guys with the brand for like maybe trader that copies trades or using third party? Trade you doesn't have copy trading capabilities, so you have to use a third party. It's a good question. What are you using, Jimmy?
I am currently using trading-SPX. It is spelled trade and then SYNCER. trading-SPX. The reason why I like this platform is because there's multiple journal that's included with the copy trade software. So you're actually getting two in the price of one. Instead of me having a trade Zelda journal and a trader subscription, it's just one, right? So that's why I like the platform. But there are parts to it, so please just be aware that they should still consider right now. trading-SPX really new. Another one that I got really good things about is trading-SPX. And trading-SPX is cheaper than trading-SPX. And they're kind of against each other. It's just that I paid for it. They had an annual sale on trading-SPX, so I can't even go test out trading-SPX right now. So maybe next year I may, but it's because they have unlimited connections and trading-SPX, but trading-SPX take them $100 a month. And they actually connect 4 different platforms. So like let's say Topstat, Lucid, whatever it is, right? But with trading-SPX, I get unlimited amounts. So once I get to multiple platforms and I have 100 accounts, yeah, maybe I have to go trading-SPX, just pay some subscription money.
So yeah, there are some people are asking how can I get in contact with Jimmy or anybody here. And some people are asking some of the questions that are specific. Jimmy is a coach inside of the community. Right. So I mean Jimmy for all inside this training group. And if you go and see some questions, let's get here. Right, make it close. Jimmy's in there just trying to he can get with you, right, Jimmy? Oh, not at all. Okay. So that would be the best way to do it. This is our free community. You can start by joining this and join this here. Okay. We're active. I read every comment, I reply to everybody. So it's cool. It's true. We're always listening, as much value as we can in the classroom with a roadmap because all the videos in the roadmap showing you all the statistical stuff that we have with the strategy, even the back testing that we have. For a 10th straight day of losses, about 1% lower. Alternative asset managers fell as management and Aries management became the latest firms. The current withdrawals from Saturday. Follow the news 24 hours a day. Subscribe to Bloomberg News now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Amy Norris. It's Bloomberg Business Flash. We return to Balancing Power. Joe Matthew and Kayla Lawrence.
All right, Amy Morris, thank you so much. Amy walking us through the market reaction to the headlines that are just crossed from the Wall Street Journal. Pentagon planning to deploy the 82nd Airborne Division to the Middle East for main combat. The Joe is important to know what exactly it may be that they are asked to do. This is specifically a restriction. Under 24 hours, straight to parachute into hostile or contested territory to secure airfields and that yes, no decision has been made yet to put boots on the ground. And these could be boots in question should the president So choose.
With our eyes on card and without the actual strait itself, where it's been suggested we would need to line the coastline with troops. Haley, this would be in addition to the Marine Expeditionary Unit that's coming in place. By the end of this week, there could be a sizable increase in forces. That's right, coinciding essentially with the 5-day deadline the president initiated when he kind of changed his tune on striking power plants yesterday. But the problem is, it's been 24 hours. We still don't have a sense, certainly following our conversation with Ambassador Freedom and saying nuclear response. Why right now, maybe with the run over for the president is going to get federal orders short term.
Yeah, I'm swearing against ceremony. The new secretary will become the new secretary of Homeland Security, Margaret Mullen, but yeah, our president certainly is likely to be faced with questions about what exactly is going on. As many are suggesting that this 5-day deadline that matches up with more troops arriving may indicate that the president could just be buying himself.
Well, I think it's possible because the administration says everything we're going to say, so that's essential right now and get their take this along with a potential breakthrough in DHS funding. It's Contributor Gina Shamzano is with us, democracy visiting fellow at Morgan County Schools Ash Center and Republican strategist Laura Gillespie of Blue Snap Strategies is with us as well, ladies. It's great to have you both. Laura, give me a sense of where this conversation is headed, because when you start talking about the grounds, you can't failed in every term so far. What would that be? Republicans and Democrats on midterm campaign trail to have to say.
Well, really, this Republican in the position to either to defend the president's decision to do that and bypass Congress. They're very involved or potentially campaigning for themselves to position themselves in. And then it also creates a question of what's the why? You just play on, what is the plan and what's the why? Are we trying to take over Parliament, or are we trying to just get ships through the Strait of Hormuz? What was the impetus and making that case not only to the power, but in fact to the American people is valid and important, and the president seems unwilling to do so. And I think there's going to be push there. I would hope they things to encourage the president to do so, to try and give the American people a pulse of what's going to be, the next weeks ahead, and give us a better sense of stability of what to expect. And I don't think he has done that so far. I also don't think he knows that right now as we sit here. JD Vance and Stephen Palmer headed towards Pakistan for work, saying that they're going to continue these conversations. They hope they'll have better sense and sharing here.
But you made the point on this show yesterday that we've continually seen this pattern with the president when it comes to Iran, of saying there's negotiations and they're making progress. It's a deal, and then shortly thereafter, usually ahead of a self-imposed deadline, he decides to strike hard. You've seen it twice now. Do you think the same is being said here for us to see it?
We hope not. I would hope that it is genuine on the part of the president, the administration, and Iran, that we have all had enough and that they are ready to get to the negotiating table. But the difficulty, of course, is can Iran trust us to do that? But twice we struck them after saying we're going to negotiate. And likewise, this is a tyrannical regime. We're difficult to know can we trust them? And that's why I thought your conversation with Ambassador Freed was so important, because when we look at where we are today, even if we do negotiate and do get a settlement today, what we have done is allowed a tyrannical regime to have control of a strait. And I can't see a universe in which they give that up without real concessions, not just from the United States, but from Israel and the rest of its neighbors in the region. So this is not up to Donald Trump anymore. It is up to Iran, because, of course, they are controlling that chokehold in the strait. So I certainly hope the president is right when he said we're negotiating, and those negotiations get us to some sort of pause and it's fighting. But we are a long way from being in a better position than where we were before we struck. Because for January, Iran was probably the weakest it had been as a result of sanctions and the rise of their own population in years. Now we have a more entrenched, dangerous leadership there, and people who can't go out and protest their own regime, and Iran controlling the strait. And it's a terrible place for us to be.
The president is balancing two potential deals this week. One is to end the war that he began in Iran, and the other is to reopen the Department of Homeland Security, which has proven to be far more difficult, I think, than anyone imagined. We went into this shutdown, which is on track to become a record-long commercial. If you're keeping track on your phone, the president spoke yesterday about the strategy to get the Save America Act passed. This is voter ID, and they want to attach it to the Homeland Security funding bill. This is what he said in Memphis.
So much time, Homeland Security, and development proof of citizenship in order to vote. And those two items are the most important thing having to do with Homeland Security. So it could be part of the Homeland Security bill. And I'm requesting that the Republican senators do that immediately. You don't have to take a fast vote. Don't worry about Easter going home. In fact, make this one for Jesus, okay? Make this one for Jesus at the right now. It would be a damn good thing.
He may not need to call Jesus because the president has backed off this idea after meeting with Senator Katie Britt, Republican from Alabama, and others backed off his demand to link the bills with a plan to come back around and attach that to a reconciliation bill. We'll hold that thought for a moment. As far as DHS goes, you've heard this before. They would carve out ICE funding and basically pay for everything in it. It would fund all of DHS except for the arm of ICE that carries out immigration arrests and deportations. And there, of course, has been legislation to that end available for everyone to vote on for months. In this case, Jeannie, what do you make of this latest development here, knowing that if they pass this whole shutdown was for nothing, right? We could have done this weeks ago.
We could have avoided this bill, but for Jesus, I will just say that yes, we could have been here a long time ago. I am waiting to see the details on this because this is a fast turnaround, even for the president. I hope that it's true, but it doesn't change nothing on the ground because, of course, this is what the demand was before. And the details we're talking about are all the reasons that the Democrats wanted ICE reform. Where are we with that? So there's a lot here that needs to be considered, but for Republicans, this would be a best case scenario because the chaos and confusion we are seeing at our nation's airports is just a reminder of the chaos and confusion of what Republican leadership in Washington, D.C. needs and everything Democrats want to run on 26.
But other Democrats, Jeannie, just quickly at the last shutdown, this full government shutdown on record ended with a few Democrats caving, having extracted none of the concessions when it comes to healthcare and rebates that they had wanted to. If this ends this way, no real reformers to ICE, is this Democrats 0-2 essentially?
It really seems like a piddly, and that's what I'm waiting to see because you're absolutely right. The last time today, they capitulated on healthcare. This time it will be an ICE, and some Democrats will push back and say, none of doubt, we have an agreement of sorts on body cameras, maybe masks, the what's going on in the airport. So there will be some pushback. But the reality is for Democrats, particularly primary, who are energized Democrats, this is going to be seen like another Democratic attempt to just lay down and Republicans want, and that's not good for Democrats.
Wow. Well, this is interesting because Jeannie, earlier you mentioned that the president not vote on this when he decided to not link the two bills together and more on it. Agreed. So we have Taco Square today. I guess more of this the state of Washington.
And President Trump tends to be, I think he does just say these things, and it's part of it has to do with the fact that he doesn't fully understand how Congress works. He has just because Johnson is giving his example, like scenarios, but in this situation, John Boone has had to be the adult in the room, always going to trust what he do. And so over enough as he did this began saying it, he said, and to work through this and come up with a plan to what you said, what was offered early on. But now he just is ICE funding attempt to save out in the reconciliation so that will be kind of kicked down the road a little bit here and get things open because I'm sure that senators are getting from constituents who are on all sides of the aisle angry about what's going on and tired to please fix this. But two, I think members really want to go home and they are not interested in staying here for anyone. Nobody's agreeing with sort of looking forward to having those over the district. So I think this is going to be the impetus to get things moving. And Fortunately, it should be a phone call about to endure.
Well, just how quickly can that back unfold? Like getting closer and closer to the midterm elections. We know reconciliation wasn't necessarily an easy win last time around. You have real confidence that Senate passage is going to be able to get through.
My concern is what else that that into it. I think that there is because of where this will fall in the timeline, there will be a push to attach a lot of things to this to try and get it done in the midterms. But then it becomes a question of what is the midterm messaging? I think some of these things on optics sound great. Where he's saying something that sounds common sense again, like that is to say that inflate federal and that it will reach the states. And so I think the message for Republicans who pride themselves on being for small government, they're actually because I think that they are currently so funded because of the tax cuts last year. When what happens in the reconciliation bill comes forward, all the misconceptions that Jeannie mentioned, the only big come into play are the masks going to be taken out by the camps. All of those things going to be part of it. We just feel and see.
All right, Lauren Gillespie, Jeannie should say no today. Thank you so much. Stay with us here on Cooper TV and Radio. We'll take you live to the Hill and Valley Forum here in DC. Next for Chase Faulkner, the CEO of Crusoe. That's ahead.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street, I think, or it's Wall Street traders here. The board that recently when stocks away from main markets remain firmly at the mercy of geopolitical headlines. Traders hanging on to any signals about whether ceasefire talks are even remotely on the table. WTI now around $93 per barrel, Brent crude topping $104 per barrel. And check markets for you all day long here at Bloomberg. The S&P 500 down 0.3%, NASDAQ down 0.8%. The down little change on the downside. Particular Treasury yield 4.41%. The 2-year yield at 3.94%. Bitcoin about 2.5% lower, now less than $30,000, however, $70,000. Growth in U.S. business activity slowed in March to an almost 1-year low. Prices paid for materials and other inputs rose this after the start of the year. Bloomberg beams down wherever you get your podcasts. I mean, of course, that's Bloomberg fixes the last. Joe, Matthew again.
All right, Chris, thank you so much. It's a busy day in the markets. It's a busy day in Washington. As at the White House, President Trump is getting ready to swear in the new Secretary of Homeland Security, Poland, at Capitol Hill. Lawmakers seem to be getting closer to a compromise to fund at least most of the Department of Homeland Security. In between the two today, so the Hill and Valley will take place here in DC, and that's where we go back to for technology and here in Hyde and London. We're joined now by the CEO of Rousseau, Chase Block. And take that.
Yeah, there's the intersection of technology and politics, and inevitably there is a conversation about the war in Iran, the role that technology is playing, and how we impact the industry broadly. And Chase, it's good to have you back with us on Bloomberg Television and Radio. So I think there is an interesting question to start with, which is when oil prices behave such as they are at the moment, and natural gas prices behave such as they are at the moment, does that have an immediate impact the operation of the data center?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the largest operating expenses for data centers is the cost of power. What's been interesting to witness is that with the war happening in the Middle East, oil prices have surged, and natural gas prices, but initially surged, but have come back down, have essentially been flat since. As a result, I think this was the result of investment innovation, U.S. energy industry. So, I'd say it's the which is not great resilience from their operating.
There's no right